Hey everyone, you're here with Dr. Python JavaScript, and we're just going over a few details about Axios request. In particular, we're going over the async await syntax. So over here, we see a demonstration, and it says that we need to wrap axios.get, which is here, function call within an async function. So this is going to be an anonymous arrow async function, which nest a try catch block. So that's pretty cool. All right. So with the try catch block, so that we can capture any errors similar to the catch method we'd use in the promise version. The variable received the HTTP data had to use the await keyword to ensure asynchronous data was received before continuing. From here on out, we'll only use async await syntax in our examples, and I'm going to do the same. I love the async await. Now, running this output to the console, it's literally going to give you the same as the promise example. And over here, it says an Axios response for an HTTP request. Which should be response, but it's just abbreviated. The response object in the example will contain the following information about the HTTP response. Data, the response body provided by the server. So if you guys know Fetch API, you'll know that we usually access response.body so we can get sort of the data within that response. But Axios, we're just going to use the data property, or data object rather. So the response body provided by the server, if the response from the server is a JSON, Axios will automatically, I love that, automatically parse data into a JavaScript object. We also have status, right? We have status text. We have headers, right? Any headers, authentication, things like that, which may accompany the response. Configurations, right? The configuration that was provided to the Axios API for the request. And then requests, the native request that generated the response. In Node.js, this will be a client response object, a client request object. In the browser, this will be an XML HTTP request object. Haven't seen that in a while, right? Now that we've seen how to make a GET request, let's see how to make a POST request. So over here, we'll send a POST request by creating a new resource in a REST API. In this case, we're making a POST request with Axios to make a new blog post for a user. Create a new file called postrequest.js and enter the following code. So over here, you can see that they went ahead and required the module Axios, cool, standard. Now we have an object we're creating, right? This object is going to be called new post, and it's going to have a property of user ID, title, and body. Great. Notice they didn't put data here. They still put body, even though we would use data to parse the response or to get sort of the body of the response. So that's interesting. Now, cool. We've got an ID, we have a title, and we have a body. Excellent. Now we're going to do the same thing we did, where we're going to create a variable, and within that variable, we're going to assign an asynchronous anonymous arrow function. Within the block of that executable function code, we're going to nest a try catch block. Within the try block, there we'll create a variable called response, or resp in this situation, right? And we're going to assign it await and the Axios post method with the URL in there. There's also the object, right? We're putting an object in there as the second argument, and that object is going to be sent to pretty much like sent to the server so that we can go ahead and update whatever database or post whatever data we're trying to. And in this case, we're trying to post a title, a body, and a user ID. Now, we can still console.log resp.data just to see the response that we get from the server from sending this particular request, right? This is a post request. We still have our catch block, which is going to have error as the argument, and you're just going to console.log error, right? You can do some error handling here. Now, very importantly, because we're storing this asynchronous pretty much function that involves Axios within a variable, it's still a function, and therefore we're going to have to invoke it, and that's what happens here. Let's see how they explain it. To send a post with axios.post, you must first supply the URL, then provide the request data in the second argument. In this case, we're sending the data in the new post variable, which will be sent to our API as JSON. That's cool that we didn't have to use any JSON methods in order to transform the data. Axios is efficiently doing that for us. Running this with node post request.js, because that's the name of the module, file, whatever you want to call it. And this over here is going to be our result. So we have an ID 101. We have a body. We have a title and user ID. So this is interesting because now we're seeing that all of the objects that we're sending to the server are going to get their own ID in addition to the ID we gave it within the actual schema for the object we want to send to the server. So we got put request, which should honestly operate pretty similarly, so I'm not really going to hop around there. Delete request, it's all looking pretty similar, right? Now over here, this is interesting. Configuring requests as an alternative to specifying the function to make a request, we can provide a JavaScript object that configures how Axios sends a request. What does that mean? So pretty much all this time we've been specifying, what type of function we want to use to send a request. We're using Axios in this situation, great. But it's saying that we can also provide a JavaScript object that configures how Axios sends a request, whether it's with the header, this, that. So here it says, for example, if we want to send a put request without using axios.put, we can configure Axios like here. We're just using Axios, right? We're not putting axios.put, axios.get, right? But we still want to do a put method. Well, here we're kind of following the old school HTTP request library where we're actually creating an object in there, and we're putting in the property method, the URL, data object, which is going to have an ID, a user ID, a title, and a body, right? Now, after that data object is closed, the try catch is closed, or try block is closed. Actually, the try block isn't closed yet. So the data object is closed, great. The Axios method there is also closed. After that, we're going to console.log response.data as we normally would. When in doubt, just console.log response.data, right? If you're doing Axios. Next block is the catch block. We're going to put error as the argument, and then we're just going to console.log error. So this is a way for us to, do it a lot more in a controlling way. I love this because clearly if you want to say get, we can do the same thing. If you want to do post, same thing. In this case, we use Axios as a function directly. I think that might throw some people off because it's not really the case. We're still doing this asynchronous anonymous function. We pass a JavaScript function that contains the HTTP method being used in the method, the API endpoint in the URL, and any data in the request in the data property, the result's the same. So here are custom headers. For certain APIs, a raw request needs to have additional data in the headers to process. I'm sure they're probably going to have a header property, but let's see. A common example would be a set of headers that authenticate the HTTP request. If we use JWT, right, those secret tokens for authentication authorization, we would have to add it to our request so that it won't be rejected by the API server. Let's see how we can add custom headers to an axios.get method call. So here, I'm pretty sure we could probably got rid of this, said get, wrote the method, wrote the header, wrote the data, or whatever we wanted. But they're making it easier for us. They're saying, okay, great, we've got our get request, same structure as before as far as the try, the anonymous function, great. And then the only difference is we have a header object, right? Within the data object that we're passing, or within this object that we're passing, a second parameter argument, and it's going to have a key value of authorization and a key of authorization and a value of bearer, your JW token here. Now, if this were a bearer token specifically, then we should be writing bearer as the key. So that's one thing I realized. But this just seems to be asking for a regular authentication token using JWT. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. And as you can see, for example, we passed the configuration with the headers property to set the custom headers for the request. The headers property is a JavaScript object. Interesting. Didn't know that. It's probably why it's actually orange in this situation. With string keys and values. Cool. So we have to enter this as JSON, pretty much. And cool, we can add this property to other Axios methods such as axios.post, axios.put, axios.delete. The header property should be entered after the data object in axios.post and axios.put. So that's important to know. Okay, so custom header. Great. They're showing this example. I mean, pretty much thought that they were doing that here already, but here they're just showing that, if we're going to do get method with the old school fashion way, configuration wise, we can do it like this. Cool. Headers. Interesting that they didn't have the data, or rather the body this time. Let's see, because last time they did have the body, right? This was a put method. Let's see for the last time they did a get method. Okay, so here awesome, get. All right, so here they're not passing an object to it. So over here, this is for the post. Great. So over here, we've got the body, right? Body. For this get request, I mean, we're gonna get a response. Typically, we could honestly send a body of data with a request, but we're not really updating anything. And if you wanted to get some authentication, it'd probably go in the header. So that doesn't make sense. Let's go back. All right, so excellent. We've got the headers. Awesome, we've actually finished it. But yeah, so here she's telling us we're going to use our method get URL as always. Interestingly enough, this doesn't have the quotes on the key and the value. So remember that our parent property here is not going to look like JSON. It's only when we get to the headers where things get a little funky, right? Cool. Now, interestingly enough, we have then that they're doing here instead of the async await. So I think they just want to show us. In this case, the headers are just another property of the JavaScript object. Okay, awesome. Okay, so Axios API configuration. That's the way that looks. Interesting. In this article, we've learned how to create a synchronous HTTP request with Axios in Node.js and browser's JavaScript. We've made requests with axios.get, axios.post, axios.put, and axios.delete. We also use Axios API to send HTTP requests by configuring a JavaScript object with the request details. Finally, we added custom headers to our request, which was also awesome. So this is a great resource. I may add it down there in the description, but I want you guys to see how we can actually implement this. So I hope you guys enjoy that video. Dr. Python JavaScript. Please subscribe and watch my next video if you really want to learn this.